The white silk of her wedding dress caught the last rays of sunlight as Eliza stood alone in the chapel doorway, 6 hours after she should have been married. The guests had gone home. The flowers wilted in their ribbon-tied bunches. The cake sat uncut in the parish hall next door. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing against stone walls that had witnessed 3 centuries of promises. A single candle remained on the altar, forgotten in the awkward exodus that followed the words, "He isn't coming." Eliza moved down the aisle, the train of her dress whispering across the flagstones. Outside, the wind picked up, bending the prairie grass in waves. She reached for the matchbox beside the candle and struck one. The flame trembled between her fingers. "For us," she whispered, touching it to the wick. Behind her, the heavy oak door groaned on its hinges. She turned just as it slammed shut with a sound like thunder. The iron latch dropped into place with a final click. Eliza ran to the door, the bodice of her dress tight against her ribs as she struggled for breath. She pulled at the handle. It didn't budge. She pushed her weight against the ancient wood. Nothing. The candlelight flickered across her face as tears tracked through her carefully applied makeup. She was trapped in the place that was supposed to mark her beginning, not her end. The small town of Millbrook had watched Eliza Harmon grow from a serious child into a dutiful woman. Her family had worked the same land for generations, and she had learned early that tradition was its own kind of religion here. Marry local, stay local, raise children who would do the same. Thomas Reed had seemed the perfect match. Handsome in an understated way, with calloused hands from working his father's farm and quiet eyes that hinted at depths she longed to explore. Their courtship had been as expected: Sunday dinners, chaperoned walks, a proposal beneath the cottonwood tree where generations of Millbrook couples had pledged themselves to each other. "He's a good man," her mother had said, helping Eliza into her wedding dress that morning. "Steady. That's what matters in the end." Now Eliza sank onto a pew, the candle burning 20 feet away at the altar. The chapel was built of limestone quarried from the surrounding hills, its narrow windows allowing thin strips of fading light to cut across the darkness. Outside, the first fat raindrops began to hit the roof. 3 days ago, Thomas had kissed her goodnight at her parents' door. "I'll be waiting for you," he'd said. Then he'd vanished. His truck was found at the bus station in the next county. No note. No explanation. Just empty space where promises had been. The gossip had spread through town like wildfire. Some said he'd found another woman. Others whispered about gambling debts. The crueler voices suggested Eliza had driven him away with demands or expectations. The kindest said he'd simply lost his nerve. Whatever the reason, she sat alone in her wedding dress, locked in a chapel while rain pounded the roof and thunder rolled across the prairie. Eliza wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and stood up. There had to be another way out. She tried the side door that led to the vestry. Locked. The windows were too narrow to climb through. She pounded on the main door until her fists hurt, but the storm swallowed her cries. As night fell completely, the candle became her only light. She made her way back to the altar and sat on the steps, spreading her dress around her like a pool of moonlight. On the altar table sat the family Bible they were to have used in the ceremony. It was ancient, passed down through generations of Harmons, its leather cover worn smooth by countless hands. With nothing else to do, she pulled it onto her lap. The pages fell open to a familiar passage about love being patient and kind. Tucked between those pages was an envelope, yellowed with age. Thomas's handwriting marked the front, "When I find the courage." Her hands trembled as she slid out the letter. "Dearest Eliza," it began. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. Not because I don't love you, but because I love you too much to trap you in a life neither of us truly wants." The letter was dated 2 years ago, long before their engagement. "There's a world beyond Millbrook's boundaries," he continued. "I've seen it in your eyes when you look at the horizon. You sketch buildings you'll never design here. You read books about places you'll never visit. We talk about children we'll raise to do exactly what we're doing. Is that enough for you? It isn't for me." Eliza's tears fell onto the paper. She had never shown Thomas her sketches, never spoken aloud her secret dream of studying architecture. How had he known? "I'm leaving to find something real," the letter concluded. "I hope someday you'll find the courage to do the same. Until then, I'll carry the memory of what might have been." But he hadn't left. He'd stayed and proposed and planned a wedding. Why? The candle guttered as a draft slipped through the chapel. Eliza carefully folded the letter and tucked it into the bodice of her dress. Thomas had seen something in her she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed. And now he was gone. At dawn, the storm passed. Eliza tried the door again and found it still locked. She gathered her dress and began searching the chapel more thoroughly. Behind the altar, she found a small door she'd never noticed before. It opened to a narrow staircase leading up to the bell tower. From the top, she could see Millbrook spread out below, morning light glinting off windows and the distant ribbon of highway that led away from town. She had never been this high before, had never seen her world from this perspective. When the caretaker unlocked the chapel at noon, he found it empty except for a wedding veil draped over a pew. Eliza drove Thomas's abandoned truck, still parked at the bus station. She had changed into clothes from her overnight bag, packed for a honeymoon that would never happen. The letter sat on the passenger seat beside a map she'd found in the glove compartment. Thomas had circled several towns in red ink. The first was Oak Ridge, a 3-hour drive west. Eliza parked outside the town's only diner and went inside, Thomas's photograph in hand. The waitress studied it, then nodded. He was here about a week ago. Quiet type. Asked about work in the area. Did he say where he was headed? The waitress shrugged. Mentioned something about checking out his grandfather's old place. That's all I know. Thomas had never talked about a grandfather from Oak Ridge. Another piece of himself he'd kept hidden. 20 miles outside town, Eliza found a mailbox with "Read" painted on it in fading letters. The dirt road led to a small farmhouse, its white paint peeling, surrounded by fields gone to seed. No one answered her knock. Through a window, she saw a room with a single cot, a table with the remains of a meal, and books stacked on the floor. On the wall hung a framed photograph. She pressed her face to the glass to see it better, a younger Thomas standing with an older man in front of this same house. The back door was unlocked. Eliza hesitated only a moment before entering. It felt wrong to trespass, but she needed answers more than she needed to follow rules. Inside, the house smelled of dust and solitude. She moved from room to room, touching things Thomas had touched, a coffee mug in the sink, a jacket thrown over a chair, a notebook open on the table. She read a few lines. Grandpa always said a man needs to know himself before he can share his life with someone else. I thought I knew who I was supposed to be. Now I'm not sure I know anything at all. Eliza sat in Thomas's chair and looked out at the overgrown fields. Had he come here seeking answers? Had he found them? She spent the night in his grandfather's house, sleeping on the narrow cot where Thomas had slept. In the morning, she found a small key taped to the underside of the table with a note. Barn loft. The barn stood 100 yards from the house, its red paint faded to the color of dried blood. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the weathered boards. A ladder led to the loft. The key opened a padlocked trunk tucked under the eaves. Inside were journals, dozens of them, their pages filled with Thomas's handwriting. Some dated back to his teenage years. Eliza sat cross-legged on the floor of the loft and began to read. Dad says a Reed man stays put. Grows roots. Makes something of the land he's given. But Grandpa Reed left. Walked away from his birthright to chase something he couldn't name. Dad never forgave him. Never spoke his name except as a warning. Another entry, dated 5 years ago. Visited Grandpa today. Dad doesn't know. Would disown me if he found out. The old man is dying but still has fire in his eyes. Don't let them tell you who to be, he said. That was my mistake for too many years. And then, from just a month ago, asked Eliza to marry me today. She said yes, like I knew she would. Her eyes didn't light up. They just accepted, like she was checking off another box on a list someone else wrote for her. I'm doing the same. We're perfect for each other that way, two people sleepwalking into a life neither of us chose. Eliza's hand shook as she turned pages, reading Thomas's private thoughts. His struggle with expectations. His fear of disappointing his father. His growing depression as the wedding approached. Some days I can't breathe thinking about the next 50 years. Same town, same fields, same conversations. Eliza deserves better. She deserves someone who wants this life, not someone pretending to want it. And I deserve to find out if there's more to me than what Millbrook sees. The final entry was dated 3 days before the wedding. Grandpa's been gone 2 years now, but I still hear his voice. It takes courage to leave, boy, but sometimes it takes more courage to be honest about why you're staying. I haven't been honest with Eliza, or myself. Tomorrow I'll tell her everything. If she still wants this life, I'll try to make peace with it. If not, maybe we can find a different path together. But he hadn't told her. He'd run instead. Eliza closed the journal and stared at the dust swirling in the sunlight. All these years, she'd thought she knew Thomas. They'd grown up together, sat beside each other in school, attended the same church. But she'd never really known him at all, just as he'd never really known her. The next journal entry she'd been about to read caught her eye. It was written in a different hand, older, shakier. To whoever finds these words, My grandson Thomas has his father's stubborn pride and his mother's tender heart. A dangerous combination. He sees too much and says too little. If you're reading this, you're looking for him. I hope you find him, but more importantly, I hope he's found himself. It was signed Edward Reed. Beneath the signature was an address in Colorado. Eliza drove west with the journals beside her. The prairie gave way to foothills, then mountains that thrust up from the earth like the backbone of some ancient beast. The address led her to a small cabin on the edge of a lake, surrounded by pines. A man sat on the porch, whittling a piece of wood. Not Thomas. Older, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "I'm looking for Thomas Reed," Eliza said, still in her truck. The man set down his knife. "You must be Eliza. He said you might come. Is he here?" The man shook his head. "Left yesterday. Said he had unfinished business." "Where did he go?" "Didn't say exactly. But he left something for you." He disappeared into the cabin and returned with an envelope. Inside was a sketch, her sketch of a modern building with clean lines and walls of glass. She'd drawn it years ago, then hidden it away as childish fantasy. On the back, Thomas had written, "You see possibilities where others see only what is. Don't stop looking." "He found this in my room," she whispered. "He kept it all this time." The man nodded. "Thomas carries other people's dreams more carefully than his own." "Who are you?" "Edward's friend. I promised to look after the boy if he ever made it out here. But Edward died." The man smiled sadly. That's what Thomas's father needed to believe. Eliza stayed the night, listening to stories about Edward Reed, who had walked away from his life at 40 to find something that had been missing. About Thomas's secret visits over the years. About the weight of expectations that had nearly crushed them both. In the morning, she knew what she had to do. The chapel was empty when Eliza returned to Millbrook a week later. She wore a simple dress, not white. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. In her hands, she carried a single candle and Thomas's journal. She lit the candle on the altar, just as she had on her wedding day. The flame burned steady in the still air. "I understand now," she said aloud, her voice echoing in the empty space. "You couldn't tell me because I wasn't ready to hear it. Maybe you weren't ready to say it." She opened the journal to the last page and added her own words beneath Thomas's. "I'm choosing a different path. Not because you left, but because staying would mean losing the person I could become. Thank you for seeing me, even when I couldn't see myself." Outside, the wind had died down. The prairie stretched to the horizon, golden in the late afternoon sun. Eliza placed the journal on the altar beside the candle and turned to leave. The chapel doors stood firmly closed. She reached for the handle, expecting resistance. It turned easily in her hand. The doors swung open, revealing the world beyond. Eliza stepped outside, leaving the candle burning behind her. She didn't look back as she walked to her car, not Thomas's truck, but her own now. The keys felt right in her hand. On the passenger seat lay college applications and her portfolio of building designs. As she drove away from Millbrook, the chapel grew smaller in her rearview mirror. She didn't know if she would find Thomas. She didn't know if she wanted to anymore. What mattered was that she had found herself. Miles down the road, a figure stood hitchhiking. Eliza slowed, then stopped. Thomas looked different, thinner, with a beard and longer hair. His eyes widened when he saw who was driving. "Eliza." "Get in," she said. "We have a lot to talk about." He hesitated. "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere new. Somewhere I can study architecture." A slow smile spread across his face. "I was coming back to find you." "I know. I found your journals." He looked away, embarrassed. "Then you know everything." "Not everything, but enough to understand why you left." She leaned across the seat and opened the passenger door. "I'm not asking you to come with me. I'm offering you a ride to wherever you're going." Thomas studied her face. "You're different." "So are you." He got in and closed the door. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people who had almost married strangers, now seeing each other clearly for perhaps the first time. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I'm not," Eliza replied. "Not anymore." She put the car in drive. Behind them, Millbrook faded into the distance. Ahead, the road stretched toward mountains and cities and possibilities neither of them had dared to imagine before. In the chapel, the candle burned steadily, its light visible through the windows long after they were gone. The door remained open, moving gently in the evening breeze, as if waiting for someone else who needed to find their way out.